I'd like to play this to my friends on Brandon Duvall Orchestra. Here's American Patrol. He played string of pearls. He said, thank you.
Should I be talking now?
Funny guy.
Quiet on the set.
Okay, good morning. We want to welcome everyone. We're having a discussion. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Goldtones Jazz Orchestra. My name is Brandon Duvall. I am the director of the Cuyahoga Falls Tiger Marching Band here at Cuyahoga Falls High School. And I think what I want to do is start by having each of the gentlemen that's here today introduce themselves and their previous or current affiliation with the Goldtones.
Dick Swinehart, adult band manager, about 30 years.
Bob Feldbush, I was in on the beginning.
Don Torosso, I did the Goldtones as well as the marching band, symphonic band. Worked with Chris for 6 years.
And I'm Chris DeMarco. I'm the current director of the Goldtones, and I did Musical Horizons 86 through 88, and then came back 1996, I believe it was. Took it there, no, 94.
94.
And yeah, to the present day.
And I'm Scott Kerfman. I was on the band staff here for 13 years and did the Goldtones for 2 years in the gap in between these guys. So I did 92, Musical Horizons 92 and 93.
We're very fortunate to have a rich tradition of band here in Cuyahoga Falls. And as we said earlier, we're starting to celebrate 50 years of Musical Horizons. So I think that it would only be appropriate to begin this discussion with the recollections from the first director of the Goldtones and the person who started Musical Horizons 50 years ago, Mr. Bob Feldbush. So if you could share your thoughts on how this came to be and maybe how it evolved over the years while you were the director.
Well, really, the beginning of Musical Horizons is the beginning of Goldtones. And in some ways, the beginning of the whole music program. It started with a man named Roy Reynolds, marvelous concert band director, and he went to the superintendent and asked the superintendent if he could hire someone who would work with him with the marching band, take that over, and start what is now called a jazz orchestra. But back then we couldn't call it that, not in Cuyahoga Falls. We had to call it a stage band, okay? And of course no one knew what a stage band was. They had no clue. There was no music for it, because you couldn't buy any arrangements. There weren't any. The only thing we had are what is now called, then called stocks. And they were written for, so it could be played with any combination of instruments, and it was really arrangements of pop songs, popular songs, okay? Some of them did swing, okay, had a connotation of swing, but they were really popular music. So we started this group, and the first year, it was pretty popular. We played for a lot of functions, particularly school functions. And the students asked in the spring, that would be 1960, if they could have their own concert the following year. And I said, sure, why not? And so they picked a name by having a contest. All the students threw a name into the hopper, and Goldtones was selected. And we had our first concert the following year, 1961, but this was wonderful facility, was not here.
Wow.
So we had to have it at Sill Middle School. And I don't know whether you know the stage there or not, but it's quite a bit smaller. And the whole first Musical Horizon lasted about a half an hour. And we had a vocalist. And as I said, we didn't have much music, so a lot of it I had to write. There were no books, there were no recordings, there was nothing to go by at that time. now we have all these wonderful CDs and everything. Back then, the only thing that was around were vinyl records. That was it. So you couldn't buy anything that nature. There were no books out. So I wrote a few arrangements, and we bought a few stocks, and that was the first Musical Horizons. Then when this facility was built, a man by the name of Stan Hott helped me put together the first Musical Horizons on this stage. And he was the first stage manager. It wasn't a full-time position at that time. It was he was a shop teacher, but agreed to help and put together and become the stage manager. And that was how it began. But it was called Goldtones and was known as the stage band at that time. The whole aim at that time was to put together a group that would help the kids learn how to play backups for singers, play for acts, that type of thing. We played for the majorettes, we played for vocalists, and that was the whole first aim. It was not a jazz orchestra because the stocks had no open places for solos. And there was nothing to help the kids that way. Everything was live music, so if they wanted to learn how to improvise, they had to go out and listen. Recordings were not that good. There was no play-alongs at all. So it was kind of just from the ground up. I think in the whole state there might have been 3, maybe 4 of those groups. Most high schools just did not have it, wasn't around. So Roy Reynolds really is responsible in a lot of ways for the beginning of it.
Over the years, Musical Horizons has enjoyed a very healthy following. Crowds have been entertained by the music and the variety of music that's been performed. When Musical Horizons was first starting, did you initially get that kind of response from the community and from the students, or did that happen over time?
Within a couple years, particularly when we moved here, one of my goals was to use as much talent as was available in the high school. And we even had a talent contest. And we played for all kinds of acts. There were a lot of different things. We had dancers, tap dancers. We had people who did juggling. We had guitar players. We had banjo players. Small singing groups, all kind of acts. And that's the reason it was really a stage band, not a jazz ensemble per se. We didn't get into that type of thing until probably middle 60s, maybe. Arrangements started to come out. Some of the first ones were from Eastman. Ray Wright wrote some of the first arrangements that were out for, quote, jazz ensemble. And even those did not have very many open sections for solos. So the getting into the soloing and the jazz type was later. But yeah, I think by the second or third year, we had this place filled for the concerts. And by about the 5th year, we were going 2 nights. So yeah, it grew pretty quick.
Over the years, the event has evolved a little bit, and once you retired, Mr. Feldbush, Mr. Marco, you were the next director of the Goldtones?
That's right.
And my next question would be for you, Mr. Marco. What things did you change or continue to do that were in place when you took over as the director of the group?
No, I'll say that I had been coming to the show since the middle 70s because I had friends at Kent State that were graduates of Falls High School when I came, and what impressed me, aside from the obvious musical quality, what I saw was the fact that it was kind of a whole school endeavor. It involved the theater department, the M&Ms often performed, the gymnastics team, so the athletic department was involved, as well as the instrumental music program, and that struck a chord with me because where I went to high school, we didn't have that kind of cooperation among all the departments. So that impressed me, that we could get a lot of people in the school involved. So when I stepped in, I tried to keep some of that kind of thing going, and at the same time, my first Musical Horizons, I got together with Ron Simon, who was the art director, and we were sitting there kicking around ideas. My idea was to do a Duke Ellington show. I had a photograph picked out for the poster. I was pretty much ready to go, and we talked, and Ron looked around. His office had every one of the 24 Musical Horizon posters, 25, whatever, and he thought, and he said, you know, there's one common thread among all of these posters, among all of these shows. He said, you know what that is? And I said, no, I looked, thought. He said, it's about looking back at something. He said, why don't you do something that's right now? And I thought, well, I gave it some thought, and I thought, well, that might be a good way for me to step in and, you know, do my thing, put my imprint on the show, and keep some of the traditions, but yet add something that was my own, or, you know, something new. And I proceeded to write the second half of the show, about 45 minutes worth of music, and that was 1986. MTV was really big, so I got some things off of there, but yet VH1 was playing Barbra Streisand regularly, so I think Barbra Streisand Somewhere, and some things like that. The theme from Miami Vice, we had a student program, some synthesizers, and the second half of the show was a little different. The first half was traditional big band and the announcer and everything. The second half was just a review, boom, 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 you know, tune after tune. And down through the years, we've done a variety of things. I've done a tribute to Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman, Stevie Wonder. Tried to mix in, you know, one of the favorite shows I think of the audience has been this show we did of traditional swing things, and we did kind of a swing, don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing part 2 or whatever. We did a couple of those that were very popular, but so was the Stevie Wonder show, and we try and involve other groups as personnel has changed in the school, as job assignments have changed. Sometimes the scheduling of the auditorium is a lot different than it was when I took over. We're a little more condensed schedule. It sometimes precludes some of the things we'd like to do, or that I'm, you know, and it changes every year. It depends on what's available, and try to keep it fresh. I wanted to not make it really predictable, but, you know, this year we have an announcer. Maybe the show doesn't lend itself to that. It's more of a review. That's what we do, so.
One of the shows that you did a few years ago that I enjoyed, I believe, was called The Great American Songbook. Mm-hmm. And there were the singers, and that was a little different, but again, appropriate in, I think, the variety, from a variety standpoint. You know, the audience gets treated to a lot of different things. Mr. Troso, I want to get to you. You obviously are a very accomplished musician. There are a lot of saxophone players sitting on this stage, and then there's a trumpet sprinkled in. We won't say who's the trumpet player, but you can tell who the 4 men are that play the saxophone, because we're the smartest one. But Mr. Troso, I wanted to ask you what was your favorite thing about working with the Goldtones and your impressions of Musical Horizons and the program in general?
Well, the favorite thing was the kids. I mean, that's pretty easy because the kids are very dedicated here. They always have been. That's still from back when Bob was here. And, you know, the parents were always very supportive. It was a lot of work. I mean, like these guys, I like to write. And so I wrote an awful lot. I can remember probably averaging 25 arrangements or originals that I wrote per year between marching band and the Goldtones. Chris and I worked together quite a bit, and we saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And you know, I did the second jazz band while he was doing the first band, and you know, that worked out great. And but as far as Musical Horizons goes, I think I'm not sure if I was the first or Chris was, but you know, it really doesn't matter. But I know I made the whole show one theme. And I thought that there were some tunes mixed in from the year at some point in time, Chris. But I think, I know one year I did a Glenn Miller show because I was on the Miller Band, and so I felt comfortable with that. So I wrote some tunes, got some other arrangements, and we did first half and second half, the Miller Band, which right now, as far as I know, is the only touring band, full-time touring band on the road right now. I remember doing a Broadway show, Chronology, from the beginning of Broadway with I Get a Kick Out of You, which I think was 1929 or 28, and all the way up to through the Wiz at that time. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of support in the community, a lot of tradition between Bob and Chris before me, and you know, it was just a lot of fun. And like I said, Chris was around. We had a great time working together, and still do on gigs. And Chris is a tremendous trumpet player, and you know, all these guys. It's a very talented group, and but the kids work very, very hard. You know, I think there have always been overachievers here, and. First time I ever heard the Goldtones, Bob came up to my high school when I was in high school for a jazz festival, and I ended up going to Kent the next year, and there were 10 of us as freshmen that made the top band, and a good number of those were from Cuyahoga Falls, and they're still friends to this day, and you'll hear some of them play this evening.
Excellent.
So it was a great experience, a great community, and it's a great show.
Mr. Kerfman, you have been a music educator in this area for well over 30 years, and because you're from the area and you've been around for a number of years prior to actually teaching here in the Falls, could you speak to your impressions of the Goldtones as a music educator in another district, and how that related to what you actually experienced when you were the Goldtones director?
Well, the stature of the organization is a well-known entity in jazz education. As Bob mentioned, they were front runners. I had a conversation yesterday with a very well-versed person from the area, and I told him what I was doing today, and he shared some stories with me. Chaz Baker on jazz staff at Kent, where I'm working now. And we were talking and reminiscing that when he was in college, and when I started in college in the early 70s, we had to practice away from the university. And Bob mentioned that it was a stage band. So the birth of the jazz education movement in the mid 60s, in the 60s, is very much connected to what has happened. And it was a real honor for me to have an opportunity to be involved with the program, relatively short period of time for myself. I think the thing that I'm as proud of as anything is that in the position that I had when I was here at Cuyahoga Falls, part of what we were able to do was, through cooperation and teamwork, is match up people's strengths with the job assignments. And I inherited the jazz band as a part of my job assignment, when the reality is there were other people on staff that had a better jazz background than I had. So besides the joy of working with the students and the fun of a couple years of Musical Horizons, I think one of the things I feel the best about my contribution to these efforts over the years is stepping aside so that a man with a master's degree in jazz education from North Texas State was able to come back on board. So it was an honor and a privilege and a challenge to follow guys like this that have the kind of chops that it takes to be prominent jazz educators, and so my contribution to this process is, I think, largely being smart enough to know that somebody else has some strengths.
And that's certainly appreciated, Scott, because I know of situations in schools where that doesn't always happen because of egos and things like that. And for you to say, this is what you thought was best for the kids and keeping all of us happy too, it meant a lot to me to be able to do this. And I was then in a position where I could really devote a lot of time to it. I wasn't trying to do marching band and symphonic band and all of those things at the same time. And I think that's been a real plus for our program that's continued on today with the varied job assignments.
Oh, that's a common thread.
Or philosophy.
That's a common thread that we try to make decisions that are good for the students, and
That goes way back.
it sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Roy, and
That goes clear back to Roy.
yeah,
When I first came here, we decided he decided, and I agreed, that we needed to divide everything up. And we did back then, and it's been that way ever since.
And to the to the present day, you're still seeing that we have people in place that can devote more of their attention to one particular group. You know, with Dustin Harris doing symphonic band, and I'm the marching band director, and Mr. DeMarco is Goldtones director. No one person is responsible for maintaining those groups that require a special amount of attention. I want to come back to something that Bob said earlier, just about the roots and the origins of jazz and how little resources or how few resources were available then, and compare that to where we are in 2011. I think, again, coming back to the whole team and the idea that people need to be where their strengths are, in our middle schools with our 7th and 8th grade bands, they're getting a jazz experience right now, and I think we're seeing that carry itself over into the high school. So here at the high school, obviously the Goldtones are doing well, and we also have a second jazz ensemble that is a pretty healthy feeder program for the Goldtones. And the kids seem excited about jazz, and a lot of times you look out in the audience at Musical Horizons and you see a lot of people with white hair, but as a younger teacher and working with those jazz students, it's nice to have them come into my office and say, hey, Mr. Duvall, I found this. You should listen to this song. This is really cool. This is by, you know, and I think that jazz is going to live on because of kids like the ones we have here in the Falls, and that's exciting. I'd like each of you to quickly share your favorite funny moment or interesting occurrence having to do with the Goldtones or Musical Horizons.
Well, we give Dick a chance here. He hasn't really had a chance to say much.
I enjoyed more than anything be associated with these young people and watch them grow up. And it's what a pleasure it is to see them 20 or 30 years later and find out what they've done with their life and how they've evolved.
I don't know, there's been so many to pick one out, but I think one that probably sticks in my mind the most, and this goes back quite a few years. There was a contest which is still going on down at North Canton, okay? A stage band contest, call it what you want. And at that time, if you won that one, it gave you the right to go to almost a national contest, which was held in Pittsburgh. It was called the Mid-East. It no longer exists. But little old Cuyahoga Falls, we were kind of the hicks from a small little town, and we had the good fortune to go all the way over there and win that national contest. And that sort of put the Goldtones on the map at the time. I think that's probably one of my favorite ones, that and performing with a lot of the great jazz musicians we had in the early years. We'll talk about that maybe later.
I think Bob kind of touched on that, and I think Chris would agree. We all agree that it's very important to expose kids to professional musicians. And I know when I was here, and I've continued to try to expose kids through going to festivals and also bringing them in. Collectively we know a lot of people, and expose the kids to a lot of great musicians, from Bill Dobbins to Mark Vinci and Jack Shantz, Paul Ferguson, both local and national. And in fact, some of the national were local to begin with. This is kind of a hotbed of great musicians in northeastern Ohio.
Well, in thinking about this, something came to mind immediately. It was the Musical Horizons. I'm not sure what year it was, probably 87, 80, maybe 88. On Thursday night before the show, my drummer broke out with chicken pox. and a very talented young man named Joe Patrick was our percussionist, playing auxiliary percussion, and he stepped in and played the show. And,
Wow.
But if that didn't, put a little fright into me, I mean, what do you do when your drummer breaks down? And as they say, the show must go on. So it went just fine.
Joe was the drummer in the second band that year, and he's a heck of a tap dancer too.
Well, and he tap danced. We did a Count Basie medley. Alan Prather put down the guitar and come up and played trumpet for us. And we did a Count Basie medley, and he tap danced the drum part on Cute, which is a famous drum solo.
Did he rush?
I don't think so. I think he was right there.
That's the first time Cute didn't rush.
It's in a hurry to get to the end.
It is.
That brings to mind a very unusual circumstance. The Count Basie band you mentioned was an E.J. Thomas. I happened to be there along with quite a few of the students from the Goldtones, and this was maybe 15 minutes before the concert was to start. They announced that the drummer had not shown up. And they asked if there was any percussionists in the audience, and a young man by the name of Bill Smith held up his hand and said, "I'm a drummer." He was, I think, a junior in high school at the time. And so he went down and played about a third of the show with the Count Basie Orchestra. Wow. The funny part was that most of the arrangements they played were things that we had played here. Those charts were out at that time with Sammy Nestor.
Yes.
And that was really something to see one of our students up there playing with the Count Basie Orchestra.
Now, my feelings are significantly hurt because I was expecting Mr. DeMarco to say that one of the highlights of his Musical Horizons career was when I sang
Oh, my
a
goodness.
tune from Chicago.
From Chicago, that's right.
So I'm insulted. My recollection is, I wish it was noble and fabulous, but I'm just remembering this skinny little saxophone player that we put in a great big foam suit for playing the theme from Batman. And we had him on a hydraulic lift and had him play a solo and come down out of the fly space and sink down to open the second half of the show. So I have to admit that it was cheesy, but boy, it was fun.
If it works,
That's
don't
entertainment.
apologize.
That's entertaining. Well, he was about as big around as my pinky, and we had him in this padded up suit looking like Batman. So it was. I'm afraid it's not too noble, but that's what I remember.
Hey, that's okay. We'll keep you. Favorite song that you had the Goldtones perform? I know that there's so many, but I think people have maybe a song that either they've arranged or that had special meaning to them. Scott, I'll start with you since you're closest to me.
Oh, it'd have to be Batman. No, I think for me the collectively the music that we worked on that let the kids develop their ability to be expressive through improvisation is probably the highlight for me. When you have a kid standing up and work with them over an extended period of time, and they go from being pretty bad to being pretty palatable as soloists, I think that's probably a growth area that is encouraged by jazz performance that is unique and special to the experience of working with kids. So I'd have to say collectively having a small part in helping kids learn how to do that is probably what speaks to me.
The tune was probably the most fun. I think the kids enjoy, the audience enjoyed. Now we played it 2 years in a row in Horizons with Superstition, the Stevie Wonder tune arranged by Mike Tomorrow, wonderful arranger over in Pittsburgh, who was with the Army Band for many years. Musically, the year that we played Green Peace, a composition by Maria Schneider from her first album, was musically a highlight for me, and I think quite challenging for the kids, and they really enjoyed the piece a lot.
Well, 2 tunes that come to mind. First of all, I love Ellington, and I remember doing one of the Ellington tunes. I think it was maybe Main Stem, playing that at Akron U and getting a lot of great comments from judges that we were doing a tune like that. It called for doubles. But also, one year I had a great sax section, and I've always maintained close ties with Woody Herman's big band, who's a great proponent of featuring great young talent. And had a great sax section one year, and we did a tune called North Shore Breakdown, which is a very difficult saxophone part, and the kids just really nailed it. It was just a fun tune, and I remember going to festivals and having other directors come up and saying, hey, that's a great tune, I'd like to get that. I tell them I wouldn't recommend it because it's a pretty tough tune to pull off with your band. But our
Breakdown's in the title, so
Yeah,
at least
yeah.
you've left the door
It's
open.
a John Otto tune, and it's a tough tune, but the kids here did a great job on it.
I don't know, it's hard because there were so many songs. I think probably the ones that I remember the most were the ones that we did with Herbie Green, because he had put out an album called Herbie Green's Big Beautiful Band, okay? And we had done a concert with him here, and when we did the Midwest in Chicago, he was our guest soloist, and he said he would like to do cuts from that album. And he sent me the parts, this one, I think it was called Precious Love, Ana Luisa. And he sent me the parts, and I looked at them, and I went, oh boy, I think we're in trouble, because the second trombone part, which Scott Garlock, who's going to play tonight, was playing, started on a double high B flat, and his part was a D above it. And I thought, wow. I gave it to the kids, they listened to the recordings, and they were able to play it in Chicago. So I guess that would probably be the high point for me as far as tunes are concerned.
I think the most memorable one I think of all the time is String of Pearls and In the Mood. Those are the best two songs that ever were.
We're going to close the show with those for
Yep.
you tonight, Dick.
Always have.
You know, there's an interesting story how String of Pearls came out. It was not anything that was thought of or I even dreamed of having as a closer. We had done a show, and at the end I had a habit of grabbing a microphone and thanking a lot of the people that had worked on the show, like Ron Simon and Stan Hott and so on. And at the end of that, the show was basically over, but the audience wanted something else. And they kept applauding, and I thought, what on earth am I going to do? What are we going to do? Well, it so happened that earlier in the year we had played String of Pearls, and it was in the folder. So I said, get up String of Pearls, guys.
Yep.
So we played it, and that's how the tradition began.
Again, this is 50 years of Musical Horizons, which anytime you're able to celebrate the longevity of something that's been as successful as Goldtones in this event, it's definitely worth taking a pause and reminiscing, but also looking forward. I think in closing, I'd like each of you to share, I guess, your final thoughts, your impressions of how you feel about the performance that's going to happen tonight, and maybe what you hope to see in the future with the group.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing all these people that I've been acquainted with over the years. And I hope that somehow this tradition will never cease. Somebody will step in and keep it going. Because I was born and raised on big band music, and that's what I dream about.
I would reiterate what Dick said. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. It really will be a kick for me. And as far as the program is concerned, it just blows me away to see how far it's come. It's hard for me even to imagine how far it's come and how far Chris has taken it now, particularly into the jazz area, from where we started. I would also like to see it continue, and I think it will. I think it's pretty well ingrained in the community, and hope to see it continue.
Well, first of all, I think Chris has done a great job. I think I know how much work it is doing the show and all the writing and all the organization. But in addition to that, getting all the alumni back and organizing will be great, seeing some people. So he deserves an awful lot of credit. I mean, he's worked very, very hard. It's not a 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. It's a long process putting this together. And I hope, if anything, it influences some people in the audience, some younger kids, to continue to go on into music, and more importantly, to go out and support live music in the community, because that's really not happening a lot. I was fortunate to grow up at the tail end of the big band era and have those experiences playing with some of the dance bands, and most of those don't exist anymore. So the only way to get this thing happening around again is to go to clubs, to support live music, and to create new venues. So hopefully this will influence not just the kids that are up on stage, but also some people in the audience to attend live performances, because coming to things like this, and as well as supporting professional musicians, is very, very important in our future of music.
My students hear me say a lot of times that the study of music, and maybe particularly jazz, is about making a life, not necessarily making a living. And I'm thinking of a young man that played saxophone for Bob a long time ago. He's come in, he's done a couple of the alumni events that we've done. Had a lot of fun. Says, I'd like to play some more, I'd like to do a little more. I said, well, what you could do is look around for a baritone sax. Get a baritone sax. And I said, there's not nearly as many bari players. There are tenor players out there in the world. So he calls me back 2-3 years later. He said, well, I took your advice. He says, I'm playing with 3 big bands now. And he called me yesterday afternoon and said, hold 18 tickets for me. He's out there proselytizing, getting all his friends to come to the show. And as proud as we are of the people who have made music a career, or made music education a career, I think the reason I get up and do what I do every morning is about people like that young man. John Smith's his name, and it's for those people as much as the ones that that are playing with this band, that band, or teaching. And it's also, but the teachers too, the ones that are teaching, that are spreading this on and doing these things. Yeah,
Touches a lot of people for
does.
sure.
I hope that the kids that are in the band right now get a sense of the importance that this kind of an activity has taken on for people over an extended period of time. And what I'm hopeful is that they have a night tonight that they remember for the rest of their lives, because you're delivering the goods, my friend, and I think all of us appreciate being included in helping to recognize this event. You're gracious for inviting us back, and I wish you and your kids a terrific time tonight, and may they build memories forever.
Well, thank you. This is something I've thought about for a long time. Thought about, well, the 50th Musical Horizons. I wonder who's going to be directing the band then, and I wonder, maybe they'll invite me back to conduct a tune or to be in the audience. Gee, here I am. So I got the gig. So
Thanks
trying to make
for
the
letting us
best of
come
it.
back, man.
Like, thank you all for doing this. That means a lot, because it's the longevity of it, and what it stands for, what it represents. Starting jazz education when there wasn't much going on in that area. I mean, that took a lot of work. I know that Bob did a lot of writing and things, and those. The other three of us, the challenge of Musical Horizons has been we've seen the changeover from the big band era. In the audience, I've thought about this. If you were 15 in 1945, you're about 81 right now. So we've had to try and straddle. The challenge has been to straddle, keeping those folks that like the traditional big band stuff alive, and that's important for these kids to know about. I mean, if you play in a jazz band, you should play in the mood and String of Pearls, and it shouldn't be the only thing you play, but you should have exposure to that, and expose them to the great American songbook that you alluded to. Going down doing the program, I thought, I've got 3 tunes by George Gershwin here. And then I had a student come in and say, oh, I just went to hear the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra with Helen Welch, and they did all 3 of our vocal numbers. So, it resonates with the kids. These are important tunes. These are things that, even though they're many, many years old, they still have value, that they have musical significance. So,
Good music never goes out of style.
well, that's where we're at.
And Goldtones Musical Horizons 50, May 7, 2011, 7:30 p.m., right here on this stage. I want to thank the 5 of you again for coming in, and the former directors and the current director for just making this truly is a very special place to work. And I think tonight is going to be just a wonderful opportunity for us to see both the past and what we've accomplished and the future, what's ahead. So I hope that the show goes well for all of us.
I've seen it, man. Well, good luck this afternoon.